So it's titled From Stalin to Winnie the Pooh, and it's about leadership. And one of the reasons for redoing is that I was given this in as a birthday present. So there is actually a book I discovered, or someone discovered and gave it to me, Winnie the Pooh on Management. And so that was, of course, an opportunity to revisit the whole idea about using Winnie the Pooh in this context. And so as far as I've got, I have to say that the book is not really along the lines we're talking here. It takes another tack on it, but and a very traditional one, by the way. And as you may know, those who have been following us for a while, we've had a series of webinars and writings and articles on leadership, on how to organize in a way that helps an organization get more value out of its efforts. And it all revolves really around how to get into a position where people are willing to engage fully with all their capacities. And if I'm not fully up to speed this evening, it's because I just came out of a 3-day training with a company where we were looking into exactly this situation, trying to come up with ways forward where they might get some benefits from working in a different way, from organizing in a different way. And it all boils down to that there are good and sufficient evidence that if you create a leadership structure that allows people to engage, then most people will actually, and you will get some of the benefits. But it's not without conflict, and it's not without misunderstanding, and hence this discussion this evening. I'll start the screen share in a moment. So here we go. The picture we've used has both Stalin and Winnie the Pooh on it, and the reason for that is that there's a lot of polarized debate going on. So we'll be looking at this 2x2 matrix here, that where they represent archetypal leadership styles. And most of the discussion goes along the diagonal, or the red arrow, where those people who take a soft and positive view on the human being, they think that everyone who demands results and who have more of an idea that we also need to look after that nobody slacks off, etc., that they are completely in the other corner where Stalin is, and vice versa. Anybody who says, well, we have to be serious about this is real work, we have to achieve some results, and they tend to look at everybody who has a softer view on things and say, well, we have to create an environment where people can thrive. Oh, these are the soft, fluffy bunny crowd, sort of hippies from the 70s that have still stayed around, and they are over in it's sort of soft, big-bellied honey eaters. And so we have just two kinds of people sitting in opposite corners and sending little missiles at each other. But we'll try and talk through the reality of this 2x2 matrix and what it actually represents in terms of views on leadership and on the human being in general. In fact, tonight we'll talk about this dialogue, the conflicting views, the history and background, where it comes from. Some of the theories, some of you may have come across them before. Douglas McGregor, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about or read his human side of the enterprise, or at least his theory X and theory Y of people. Fewer may have heard of Matthew Stewart and James Madison, the 4th president of the US. We would also like to call on the stage. Then we'll talk a little bit about Gallup and present some facts for why engagement of the individual is a determining factor in success of an organization, and ever more these days where we are in complexity. And then we will have a short discussion in breakout rooms. What could make people in the hierarchy want to change? Because this is sort of an alternative to the hierarchical way of organizing things. We've done several talks and articles before on the hierarchy, and we won't repeat all of that. Suffice to say that if there is a strong hierarchy, you cannot really avoid that there's a big focus on power, because that's what the hierarchy is about. You cannot really help it, but your focus will be on pleasing your boss. And as good old W. Edwards Deming said, if the boss becomes the customer, who takes care of the real customer? The other thing is, if you furthermore, as we do today, couple the hierarchy and positions in the hierarchy with lavish salaries and other perks, this becomes such an attraction that this is where people want to go. And therefore, their focus goes away from the intrinsic motivation of doing the job and serving the customer, because the hierarchy is such a strong attraction. Try and let you discuss that in the breakout rooms a little bit, and then come with a proposition. What could we potentially do about it? Stalin and Pooh, sort of Stalin quotes, you cannot make a revolution with silk gloves. And another point of view from Stalin is everyone imposes his own system as far as his army can reach. In the Soviet army, it takes more courage to retreat than advance. If you retreated under Stalin, you were probably shot. Sincere diplomacy is no more possible than dry water or wooden iron, was also one of his point of views. Ideas are more powerful than guns. We would not let our enemies have guns. Why should we let them have ideas? Now that doesn't sound very nice, does it? And of course, Stalin was in no sense of the word, a nice guy. On the other side, Winnie the Pooh has been heard saying, don't underestimate the value of doing nothing, of just going along, listening to all the things you can't hear and not bothering. What could be more important than a little something to eat? Rivers know this. There's no hurry. We shall get there someday. If people are upset because you've forgotten something, console them by letting them know you didn't forget, you just weren't remembering. People say nothing is impossible, but I do nothing every day. And there you can see how if we have polarized these two views, there's not much discussion going forward in society. That's often the case, that if you, and I think I have felt it so many times in trainings, that when we try to present the ways of how you can make people engage, and then you come across the people in the management hierarchy, and more often than not, they sort of, oh yeah, there are these romantic people around here who have the idea, but in real business, yeah, trust is very good, but control is better. And it's still around in an awful lot of places. And it's hard to get a real discussion going on it. So let's dive a little bit into some of the backgrounds. In many ways, this discussion started in 1960 with this book called The Human Side of the Enterprise, Douglas McGregor. What he said was that, there are two kinds of people in this world, not like Clint Eastwood said in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There are two kinds of people in this world, those with loaded guns and those who dig. You dig. No, he said there are two kinds of people in the world. There are Theory X people. They dislike work. They're bored. They try to avoid it as possible. You must either force them or bribe them into doing something. They would rather be told what to do than take responsibility. People are motivated by money and about fears, especially about losing their jobs. Most people have little creativity, except when it comes to getting to bending rules. On the other hand, Theory Y says that people need to work and want to take an interest and see the results of it. And under the right conditions, they can even enjoy it. People will, given the opportunity, direct themselves towards the target that they accept. People will seek and accept responsibility under the right conditions, of course. Under the right conditions, people are motivated by the desire to realize their own potential. And creativity and ingenuity are widely distributed and not really given the opportunity to flourish. That was his statement. he was sort of alluding to the fact that, and people have read him differently, by the way, that he said that there were these two kind of people, but I think what he in fact he did was that he said that he believed in theory Y, but there was a lot of people that believed in theory X. So in his Nils Flagging, one of the people we have worked with, he says everyone immediately know I'm a theory Y sort of a person. But when we think about other people, well, we're not so sure about them. They could, in fact, probably be a bit of a theory X person. But what he says is theory X is a prejudice about other people. Now, I have been around long enough that I'm not terribly romantic about people and about how much of the time they behave like theory Y. I do know that we have our issues with people from time to time. So it's not that this is a total romantic view, but I think some of the answers perhaps can be had from someone like Matthew Stewart. Matthew Stewart is a philosopher. In fact, he has a degree in philosophy. He went on to become a management consultant, and he's written, in many ways, a terrible book about the scams of management consultants. And you almost can't believe how bad it is when you read it. He left that business and went back to become a writer, and has written a number of books that are quite interesting. For this purpose here, we will mention some of the stuff he sort of picks up from McGregor. So he says, yeah, McGregor was right in talking about this, and there are definitely those ideas about people out there, the theory X and the theory Y. But he says, we have to realize that there's more to it than this simple two-dimension. It is actually, there are two dimensions. There's a vertical axis as well. We have to add, he says, another one, theory U for utopian and T for tragic. And that's about where human conflicts come from. Human conflict is a fact. We deal with it every day, and we may at some point have had a romantic view that we could come up with a way of doing things that avoided conflict altogether, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Nobody's come up with the magic formula. And Matthew Stewart says, no, it is there. We have to deal with it. That explains where tension and conflict also in organizations come from. And that's in fact where this 2x2 matrix comes from. So he says, in one side here, the programmers. That was the picture of Taylor down in this corner, in honor of Frederick Winslow Taylor. 110 years ago, he wrote the book on scientific management. He was deeply convinced that the expert could come up with a system for any kind of work, planned into small details, broken into small tasks, and then the workers could be given the tasks, and with appropriate nudging, with carrot in front and stick behind, you could get them to execute tasks. You could program the system. This was a utopian view of being able to program everything around work so that it would just function perfectly. That was Taylor's view. He definitely had the view of people that they were theory X. They needed to be bribed and threatened to do some things. He was also very, very much in favor of that the expert could know everything and the workers would just execute the task they were told. So not something that we would really like to subscribe to today with our view of people, perhaps, but the effects of it are still around. Up here are where, if you really have a tragic view of the human being, coupled with the theory X, like the English philosopher Hobbes, then, well, people are self-centered, unintelligent, leave them alone, they'll destroy things or steal it. the only way to get stuff done is total control. And that's where we get the picture of Stalin from. Total control is the way forward. And down here, the freedom lovers. Oh, let's just be friends, all of us. In fact, many of the management gurus have promoted the idea of very soft and romantic views on people. And yes, just leave them alone, fire all the managers. People will achieve miracles. Just leave them alone, and wonderful things will happen. And of course, we've probably come across a few of those as well. Now, according to Matthew Stewart, what we really need to be is up in this corner. And he called those constitutionalists in honor of James Madison, the fourth president, who also was one of the people who wrote the American Constitution. He was actually one of the bigger contributors. And one of the things Madison especially got into the American Constitution was the idea about how we need to have checks and balances. Because Madison said, the human being, man, needs freedom. That's why we created the United States in the first place. Liberty. Liberty from religious oppression or kings and other authoritarian figures. Man needs freedom. But unfortunately, left to his own devices, man will sometimes try to realize himself by seeking absolute power. And to prevent that from happening, and especially talking about the government and the whole nation, we have to have checks and balances so that one person can't just run away with it. Now, we've just witnessed an American president who tried to run away with it all and basically ruined the other two institutions, the legislative and the judicial system, in order for giving him, the executive system, total power. But Madison created and drafted the documents that try to secure that there will be checks and balances. He said it is necessary. The biggest conflict is along the diagonal, as we started talking about, because people have these polarized views of each other. Stalin versus flower power or Winnie the Pooh. We need theory Y. We cannot thrive on, nobody today really, I would hate to be under a theory X kind of management and just being treated like that. I would look for the exit very, veryquickly. We need, but unfortunately, it's also not romantic. It doesn't, we've seen that with in Summer of Love 67 in San Francisco turned out nasty. Any kind of commune that has started with the abolition of any kind of responsibility ended up in disaster and terror and terrible things. It doesn't work. We need checks and balances, constraints on some sorts. So therefore, we must be prepared to handle conflict. In an organization, we also need some sort of constitution, operating principles. It's not enough just to say, let's all be good friends. We need something. And James Madison has, in fact, quite a lot to say about this. And he said, and this is end of the 1700s, remember, Americans are divided in myriad of ways. Today, there are even more myriad of ways, I'm sure. He called them factions, and we would call them interest groups. And he said, the causes of these divisions are there. They are in the nature of man. We cannot remove them. We cannot remove those causes. People have differences of all sorts, and we can discuss another time what kind of differences they are. But he says there will be conflict. There will be different interests that people are fighting for. But he said all the combatants are part of the people equally. And that was what he was calling for. That although we have these differences, there must be civil debate, there must be civil rules to handle it, and not just demonizing the opponent. And he said, we are really arguing about the policies that best balance the long-term interest of a diverse nation. Sort of edging into how can we deal with that in organizations? I want to just say a little bit about the classic hierarchy. Why do we have it? Why is it that we have this idea that we should be organized in a hierarchy. There seems to be that all societies tend to gravitate towards stratification. Stratification, that is, that there's big differences between the top and the bottom of society. And it seems left to itself, we move in that direction. And of course, those with the money at the top have the power, because that's how it is. If you look at the American situation, over the last 20 years, there's been an enormous increase in stratification, where the top 1% have got immensely much richer, and the bottom 90% have lost out. There's about a 10% there from 90 to 99 who've more or less held their ground, and they have become the new aristocracy. They're not part of the super wealthy, but they have really, really comfortable lives. And so stratification seems to be, power seems to concentrate. Of course, in the poorest countries, maybe you don't gravitate towards stratification that way, but you tend to also, if you look at Africa, have rulers pop up that tend to run away with the whole government budget and so on. And here's a quote from Poland back in the days when they were under communism. And they was, of course, supposed to be against capitalism. And they said, in capitalism, one person takes advantage of another. In communism, it's just the other way around. And that's a sad fact, that it actually appears to be that no matter what kind of system, then there is someone who tries to get on the top and take advantage of other people. The hierarchy came into the business world in 1941. The trigger was a train accident in Western Massachusetts. This was very early days. I'm not sure we even had trains in Denmark at that time, maybe one train going between Copenhagen and Roskilde. But they were far ahead in the US at that time, and they had from Boston to Albany, upstate New York, a train line. And somebody sent two trains out, and they hit each other. And nasty accident, people were killed, injured, etc. And then they let Major Whistler from the army head up the commission that was looking into how can we avoid such disasters in the future. And he came up with the hierarchy and says, this is how an organization should be modeled, so that there is very, very clear responsibilities at each level, because then you can always find the culprit, the guilty party, where there is dereliction of duty. And in his book, the only reason something went wrong was that people didn't do what they were told to do. That was the only way. And it was actually widely adopted that, yes, okay, this is how we do it. And he modeled it after the Prussian army, which was the most well-organized army at the time. Giving and taking orders became the nature of the day. Responsibilities and the objectives on one level became the tasks of the next level. And from there, we got the way that the hierarchy works. The hierarchy is here to ensure compliance and predictability. And that actually is not what we need today. We need maneuverability and resilience. Heading up for a break in a moment, I'll just skip forward to a slide here about where we want to bring out some data that Gallup has actually published. Gallup is a company that perhaps most of the time we think of it as sort of, well, they're just making surveys. And so Gallup has now made a research of how the next election will go, etc. But in fact, they do quite a lot more. And they're also very engaged in certain areas in businesses. Some of you have seen this one before, but it's one that we use a lot in our training. We use it at retrospective with a team, for example, and this comes from Gallup. It's called the Q12 questionnaire, engagement of a team. And it's a standard that was published first in 1991 by Gallup, based on a research starting with 80,000 managers, trying to figure out why is it some teams perform excellently well and some don't. And those that perform well seem to having a good time. And there are managers or leaders who can get such teams in action and others can't. What's the difference? And so they came up with this questionnaire And they've been using that ever since to make global survey of people's engagement. One of the key things of this questionnaire here is that they say that the first question is so important that if you don't have a high score on it, you don't need to answer the rest of them. It will overshadow the rest of them. Do I know what's expected of me here? This is part of psychological safety, which is another huge discussion. We may have another time, but for people to engage and to flourish at work, they need to have psychological safety. A big part of that is that they know what's expected of them. In all my work with training over the last 15 years, I've never come across anybody who appreciated having a boss who was sort of changing his opinion all the time. Oh, we need to go in that direction today, and tomorrow, no, we need to go in that direction. Why didn't you go in that direction? That was obvious. Nobody loves to be under a boss like that. We want to know what's expected of us, that it's okay to be me here. I may not be totally happy with it, but at least I know what it is, and I can talk about it, I can negotiate it. We deal with reality, not just fluctuating opinions all the time. So this questionnaire here is a valuable one that you might find useful in working with teams, but they've been using it for years, and they've been using it, for example, to come up with statistics about how engaged are people really, and it's been possible to seeing a growing trend in the US in the people that were engaged. So how many percent is engaged? The last figure that we sometimes quote as well is that on a global scale, 85% are disengaged. The US is above average. Western Europe is below average. Here in Scandinavia, I believe we are just exactly on the world's average. Western Europe is as a record low of about 10%. What does that mean? That means that they invest their mental capabilities in thinking about the job and how can we do it better, and do we actually do what we're supposed to do, or am I just showing up and doing what I'm told? That's a scary big number. COVID has reset the improvement. We lost, this was a big drop in people's engagement. One quote is that 33% of those who leave a job leave it because they're bored. 21%, this is a Danish research, leave because of their boss. So there's good reason to work on that relationship. Engaged, people who are involved in and they're enthusiastic about their work, they are psychological owners of the situation. They drive, they push in performance innovation, they move forward. Not engaged are people who are not attached. They're putting time, not energy and passion into their work. And then there's the group called actively disengaged. And they work against the organization, they're resentful, and they potentially undermine what other people do. You can read it from the Gallup quote at the link at the bottom when you get the PDF. So these are some terribly scary numbers that we have. Some of the details in the Gallup Q12, what do these different questions actually answer? They talk about basic needs, individual needs, the next group, teamwork needs, and growth needs. People need to grow also. We need to cultivate an organization and create an environment so that people can grow. In some of the work we've done where we've used this Q12 questionnaire, we found that what really held people back was that anybody talked to me about my progress? No. In the last year, have I had any opportunities to work, to learn and grow? No. Very often the case that people don't feel that. Here's a Danish survey, and for those of you who are not Danish readers, what it says at the top reason for leaving the job was I was dissatisfied with my boss, 21%. 16% left because they got a better pay. 16% left because they were bored. 15% left because they couldn't see any personal development. so that's a Danish one, and I don't know how it can be. Probably, I think it can be used in the other Scandinavian countries. We seem to end up much the same way. So here's a collection, final one, and then I'll stop this statistics stuff here. So if we start with globally, 85% are not engaged. In the US, approximately 500 billion is lost because of disengaged employees. 81% of employees would consider leaving now if the right place called them. Companies or organizations who have high engaged workforce are 21% more profitable, or are able to do 21% more with the same money if they're a non-profit. High performing company culture leads to 4 times larger revenue growth. And again, this is from another statistic, but they find that 1 in 3 get bored, and maybe because they ask a specific group of highly educated people. I think that could be the case, and so they leave. And recognition, they don't get recognized. For the 37% feel they don't get recognized, and only 29% are happy with the possibilities they have for growing and advancing. So there's something to be dealt with here that we need to pay attention to. We'll talk about that in a moment. What we learned from Gallup is that we experience an average of much lower absenteeism. So people simply are not as much sick. Higher profitability, customer metrics, and fewer negative outcomes. Again, you can read these themselves. We experienced a drop in engagement. Leaders and managers were affected the most by the COVID crisis. And we can conclude from what it is that we need to have the clarity. And we have now over 2.7 million workers worldwide from Gallup that we can base this statistic on. And they conclude here, if leaders have learned anything in 2020, it is that employee well-being is an essential factor in business survival. If your people aren't healthy, physically and mentally, you won't succeed. And there's, of course, a lot of things we can do. So we would now ask you to discuss in breakout rooms a little while, and then we'll conclude with a single slide after that. Be the gardener of an organization. Look at some of the things that these people say here. Amy Edmonds says that psychological safety is where we need to be, because that enables learning. No one gets punished for admitting a mistake. No one gets punished for asking for help. No one gets punished for suggesting a better way of doing things. And Robert Putnam talks about trust-based shared goals and values. And that takes a long time, where we experience trustworthiness from each other. Informal shared norms and values that promote cooperation and trust go well beyond what's required by the law. And he talked about how the market, the diamond market in New York, was extremely efficient because it was mostly run by Orthodox Jews. And there was among that group of people, a word was a word. You just didn't break rank, and you didn't try to cheat or anything. There was an enormous, I'm sure there's lots of other problems being a member of the of an Orthodox Jewish community, but it's certainly, there was a lot of trust that you could rely on each other. And that's why transaction and monitoring costs are low. So in any organization, if we trust each other, and maybe you saw that this is probably the reason why we in Denmark, after all, came out not so bad after the COVID crisis, because there's a lot of social capital that we actually do trust each other. So transaction monitoring costs are low. And then focus on intrinsic motivation, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So I'd like to send you out in your in some breakout rooms, and I'll create 3 of them, and give you until 10 minutes to 8 to just quickly try and see if you have some ideas about what would it take, what should we do to create an appealing value proposition so that people in a hierarchical management structure might want to be part of this game here. I hope you get the point or understand it. So what could we do that could be a motivator for people to actually be part of this? Does that make sense to you? So we'll see if we get some good things on the table, and I'll send the people out right now. Obviously, we're asking this question also because our struggle is every day more or less trying to persuade some of the companies we work with to take the plunge. And exactly as you said, Morten, it's very often we have a slide that shows sort of here's the hierarchy, here's the man in the top, some people in the middle, the gray matter at the bottom, here's the new structure. And this is sort of our key slide to talk from. And whenever we show this one, and usually it happens sort of 10 minutes into a meeting, then there are people around the table who, okay, what happens to those guys in the middle? Because that's us. Yeah, so they're slightly worried about that. Where do they go? And it's a valid thing, of course. This is their livelihood. This is their way of existence. This is the way they understand themselves. Yeah. Anything else? Otherwise, this was just one final thing I would like to show you. Just repeating basically what it is that we proposed to end with. One thing is to get there, to get people to go with us, of course, but instead of the hierarchy, what is it that we propose to do with an organization? And in some ways, it's extremely simple because it's just focusing on who you serve, taking a serving attitude, a serving view on things. Say, well, we serve our customers. Or if you're a non-profit organization, there's a certain clientele you would be of service to there. But we serve our customer. Let's start with the customer. Let's think carefully about who these customers are. How can we group them? How do we understand them? For each of the categories of customers, let's write a manifest of how we understand who they are and what they need. And then let's think about how can we put together some small teams, and here we are again with small teams. We call them circles here. Let's start with a small circle with a team in it, an operational unit. If this was the German army, this would be a Kampfgruppe. They have a certain striking power. They can do things, and we try to put them together so that they ideally serve those customers that we've designed them for. Small group, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Based on the Scrum principle, leadership, dual leadership, the blue guy, like a product owner, looking out for the customer, the green guy, like a Scrum master, looking for how the organization works. And we put them together the best we can. And then, of course, there's probably some challenges that we would like to have slightly bigger teams, perhaps, because well, we can't do everything that we need to do for these customers. So, and that's one option, but we could also say, well, we have actually some friends behind the wall, inside the organization, not at the forefront of the organization, in the periphery, but in the middle, in the center, and they can help us. This group H can do some of our work, and we delegate to them. And this one I can also do some work for us as part of our serving the customers. H and I do not have customers in the outside world, but inside. We can also extend this to a view of our suppliers. And the lines here, we call those relationships. And we try to describe them. And these are actually part of the constraints I talked about before that Madison promotes in society and that we promote. We need to have checks and balances and some constraints, some rules of engagement, how we work together. And these are described on the relationships. Some of you will have guessed already, this is the value stream. This is simply a model of what we know from Lean, the value stream. And we have delegation as the operative principle. We delegate something to one of the other circles and they deliver it to us. And by having clear rules of engagement, we can reduce confusion and we can make it work in a satisfactory way. We have request and delegation moving to the right and fulfillment and delivery moving to the left. Straight out of good old Deming's book, instead of focusing on serving your boss, you focus on serve the customer, whoever that may be, whom you serve. And then, of course, there's some coordination here and some resolution, because when there are multiple circles and multiple people involved, there will be conflict or misunderstandings or disagreements or something. And if we can't handle them just by negotiating with each other, which is the ideal, then we have what we call resolution circles above them, where part of it could be tactical. We need to get a job done. And some of these team members meet up here to discuss, when are you guys done with this so that we can get on with it, etc. Tactical resolution. Or strategic resolution. These are all the blue guys down here. They meet up here to discuss, for example, if they get into a disagreement about prioritization of jobs. So E may have delegated something to H, and F has done the same. And E came first, and H says, we serve the first one. First come, first serve. That's not reasonable, F says, because we have 1 million kroner riding on this order, and E only has 100,000. We should come first. No, you shouldn't. Yes, we should. And then we have the conflict. And then one of the green guys, the Scrum Masters, will say, okay, time out, escalate. Let's go up and ask. And then they meet virtually or physically or whatever. They meet in the strategy group and they say, okay, let's just behave like grown-ups now and see what's best for all of us and resolve this disagreement. And maybe they do agree on that F should come first this time. This is best for all of us. Then E doesn't have to feel bad about it, because this is the best for all of us. We all agreed on it. This should not punish E on his bonus or anything, because this is decided for the common good. And that's what happens here. So ideas and issues go up, escalation, resolution, delegation goes down. And if it's a big organization, there could be another layer. But instead of having that traditional hierarchy, we have these circles that actually consist of people who are part of the value stream. They're not a separate aristocracy of managers. These are the same guys that are involved in getting stuff out the door to the customer. Then the other thing we propose, as some of you may recall, that we from time to time use some secondary circles, and that's for cross-cutting concern. Let's say across all these circles, there are people who are experts in design, or QA, quality assurance, or some other technical skill that we have in common here. And they meet in the secondary circles to support each other, to develop that field of expertise, institute training, perhaps decide on the next test system we're going to buy, or whatever. But these are cross-cutting concerns, and they are important to have. Some of you have heard about Spotify or read about them. They call these groups for guilds in Danish, laug, tømmerlaget, murerlaget, a collection of like-minded professionals who support each other and develop their field of expertise. So primary organization is towards delivery, serving the client. Secondary organization is to develop our technical skills. And from time to time, we may need what we call a transient circle. That's if we experience a sudden drop into chaos of some sort. Typically, it's a negative, but it could be from time to time, miracles do happen, and there's an unexpected opportunity, and we need to capitalize on it. And we put a small task force of the sharpest tools we have in the shed to exploit this opportunity or to mitigate this sudden drop into chaos. Let's say we have a hacker attack on our IT system, and we put together a task force of the best possible team, give them a lot of authority to remedy the solution, to stabilize the solution, and then we disband them again and go back to normal. So transient teams are part of it. Now, this is very different. And although in the beginning, when we started this, we started 3 years ago when a bunch of us Scandinavian Scrum trainers sat together and said, what's the next step after helping teams be better? But what about the whole organization? What if we want the whole organization? And in the beginning, it all sounded very, very easy. But the more I think about it, the more I see how difficult it is actually to transition from the hierarchy, because your whole existence and your whole view of your position is tied into that hierarchy position. So we need to highlight the values of this. And as Morten said, how do we find the motivators? Compensation has to change to be something else, so it's not just up and down based. So there's quite a lot of work. And then again, why is it we should have another kind of organization? Well, simply because people are more engaged and then they become better at solving complex problems. The hierarchy is preventing people from being effective at solving complex problems. That's the claim. So yeah, I would like to end with this, and then just to remind you that we have another one coming up in about 2 weeks' time, where Paul on the call here, plus
Yes.
our colleague in Sweden, Skåne, more precisely, Arne Olander, will talk a little about the way we try to develop a network of people globally that works with these principles and promote them, etc. So for those of you who have an interest in maybe being part of our network, network members can be just associated, perhaps use the information in their current jobs. Some people are independent consultants, use it for coaching, etc., and some are accredited trainers and run training courses. So we'll talk about that in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, there are some articles on this subject that you can have a look at if you want to. I'll put the PDF up in Meetup in the section where you can get it. We offer training in these principles. We offer coaching and support. We develop tools. Gemba, the online workflow tool, is one of them that we work on. Yeah, I think that's more or less it. Final slide. It's unfortunately broken. The way we manage right now, so we need to gang together and build a new one.